Hey guys, today's lesson is on wall layout, and we're going to do a simple wall layout today for you. We're going to show you how that works, and we are not going to have any rough openings. In other words, this is just a wall for one of our sheds. We don't have any doors on this wall. We won't have any windows, so we don't have to worry about that. Recall from earlier our discussions that because of our sheathing sizes, plywood and drywall and all that stuff comes in those nice 4 by 8 foot sheets, that we need to put our studs either 16 or 24 inches on center. And we'll talk about on center as we go to layout. Grab yourself a tape measure, and almost every tape measure in the United States has got markings that are multiples of 16. So you see right here on my 16, I have got nice big red letters if I could figure this camera out. Okay, so I have my 16 is red. I moved it out. My 32 is red. The marking at 48 is red. I went to 64. I discovered that one is red. Now, I used to say that all tape measures in the United States were made that way until I found this one in my storage of tape measures. So the same thing, only you notice that 16, instead of being red, has got a little black dot right there at the top of the 16 next to my finger. Pull it out to 32, it's the same thing. Not a great tape measure for beginners. If you know what you're doing and this just is okay for people who can figure that out or know that there should be a stud placed here. But for beginners, these nice tapes with the red markings on are ideal. So this is the one we're going to stick with today. I've set a couple things up already. I've already got my boards crowned. Okay, you recall crowning before when we used to say, which way does the board go? And I do have it marked with my crown mark. I also, you notice I have a nail here, and I have a nail at the other end of my board to hold my two boards together, because I don't want these things moving. I want to lay this thing out in one shot, and I don't want these two boards moving against me and my marks being off. So you could take a clamp and you could do that, but if you're on the work site, clamps are pretty tough to come by, or they're way back in the utility truck and you have to walk a ways to get them, and then you're burning up time and the boss wonders why you're just out for a walkabout. So we've got these two things nailed together, our top plate and our sole plate. We've got them both crowned, and we're going to start the layout. So I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit so you can see how I'm doing this, and we'll be right back. So I've got my camera readjusted. I've got my top plate, my bottom plate on my table here, and I'll start doing the layout. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure that everybody that comes after you and does the boards and whatnot knows what way you're working from. So what I like to do is I like to put a big arrow on my top plate and on my bottom plate, so everybody knows that I'm working from this corner right here on. It's not a bad idea, too, if you're working with a big building. You recall last year, those of you that were in my construction class, we had quite a few really butt-numbing cold days. So we had problems with it being too cold and too dangerous to work outside. So one of the things that we did is we did our plate layout on those really cold or those rainy days. The bad thing about that is when you take them out to the work site, then you start wondering, okay, where does this plate go? So it's not a bad idea maybe to label this like south wall, east corner, something like that, so that people know that these two are for the south wall. We're starting at the east corner and working our way west, which would be a dumb way to go, but it doesn't really matter, I guess. So I'm going to hook my tape, and there's always going to be a stud at the very end of my plate. So I'm just going to mark that with a mark at 1.5 inches, just as a reminder that I'm going to have a plate there. Okay, then I'm going to go to my 16, and I hope that you can see this. You're going to be upside down a little bit, just simply because of the way the tape is working. But you can see that on my 16 mark, I'm not going to mark it at 16 inches, because 16 on center, which means the center of my stud goes on this mark. So what makes more sense to do is to back off from 16 3/4 of an inch. And why 3/4 of an inch? Well, a stud is 1.5 inches wide, and 3/4 is 1/2 inch. So I'm going to mark this at 15 1/4. And sometimes for beginners, it's not a bad idea to mark 16 3/4, or also go plus 3/4 of an inch. So then I know that that stud's got to fit in between those two marks. I could mark on one side and then just put an X, or I could mark both sides. Either way is fine. Keeping my tape tight, I can go to my next mark and I can go to 32. Only I'm going to go 31 1/4. I'm going to go 32 3/4. Put my mark. I want to put an X there. I can do that. And I'm going to skip out to 48 here, which is my next red mark on my tape. Again, 47 1/4, 48 3/4, and so on and so forth. So here I'm at 64. Put a mark. It's going to be fun with that knot right there. 64 3/4. Put a mark. I'm running out of real estate in my shop, so we'll pause for that, and I'll finish marking this out, and then we'll show you what to do next. So I'll be right back in a second. All right, so my next step is, after I've got my marks laid out, I'm going to take my square. I can use a speed square or tri-square. It really doesn't matter what square I use. I'm going to place it on my marks. I'm just going to make marks across both studs, and that's, both plates. So now you see that the marks are lined up perfectly, and if the marks are lined up perfectly, when I go to lay my studs out, they should be marked perfectly as well. And the two studs should be exactly straight up and down, holding our top plate and our bottom plate together. So I just walk my way down, doing that on all of these. We'll pause it again. We'll give you an idea of what I'm doing here. Now, it might be kind of tough for you to see, but way at the end of this stud here, tilt that and bring it down. You can see that I'll have a stud right here, and I'll have a stud right here. Now, this is only a 10-foot wide wall completely, so, and it's just a utility shed, so I could probably get by with going 2 foot on center, but for educational purposes, I like to get in the habit of going 16 inches on center. It's going to add maybe additional 2 studs per wall, and so you're looking at a cost of maybe $5 per wall just because of the studs. So not that big of a cost in difference, but I like to do it educationally so that you know more stuff about how sheathing should line up on studs and how it works out with 16 on center. So again, I could do it 2 feet on center, but we just decided to go 16 inches on center. So I'm going to have a stud here and I'm going to have a stud here, which is not unusual. Now, I have seen people who have actually taken this stud and eliminated it and said, well, I got a stud right here and I got a stud back here, 2 feet away. Why do I need another stud there? And it's surprising how many times that if you're staggering your seams on your sheathing like you should do, you shouldn't have all the seams going vertically on the same set of studs. You want to stagger those seams where you're actually going to need that last stud there. So if you start with 16 on center, make sure that you put that stud there anyway. Also, because if somebody's doing siding later, putting up like vinyl siding or something, they want to nail into the stud. They don't, especially on sheds, you don't want to just nail into the sheathing and have it go just into the sheathing itself, and then on the inside of a shed that we're not going to insulate, now we have nails sticking through that sheathing. So it's kind of a nice thing that when you're nailing up siding, you can find this stud because it's 16 inches on center, and you can hit this stud with the nail for the siding, so you don't have those nails sticking out through the sheathing on the inside of the shed itself. So kind of a dangerous thing, especially if you got little kids around. So we'll set up one more thing. We'll lay these things flat and we'll take a look at them, and we'll be right back. All right, so I finished my layout and I took my 2 nails out of my top plates and my bottom plates so I could separate them, and I've marked them out. I've actually marked the faces of the boards as well. So you can see these are the marks that we had when we started. Now, if you need to, and I do this with students a lot because sometimes it's tough for a student to know to get that 2x4 perpendicular to the face of the top plate and the bottom plate, or the sole plate. So what you'll do is, if you want to mark the faces of the boards, what you do is you take your two top plates and your bottom plate. You can see my marks there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open them up like a book. Okay, so that if I put marks on the faces of the board, they're going to be marked so that the crowns on my top plate and my bottom plate are running the same direction. Okay, so the crown on this one is running that way. The crown on the bottom plate or the top plate, depends upon which one I use. I really don't have these identified because they should be exactly the same because there's no openings. So the crown on this one runs that direction. So they run opposite each other. So when you open that up, you've got the crowns facing that way. So when you take the one board and you put it on top of the other board like that, the crowns are now going to run exactly the same. So laying flat on the table, the crowns run opposite because we open it up like a book. When you go to put them on, let me mark that this top plate with the crown on it. So there, I've got my crown mark. Hopefully you can see that. So you see that they are opposite each other. But when I take this one and I go to put it on the top of mine, you'll notice that my two marks will run the same direction. I've got that marked on the top as well. So you can see that my crown marks are running the same direction on the top plate and the bottom plate. And that's what you want. You don't want to have that wall where the top plate is skewing one way and the bottom plate is skewing the opposite way. It's just going to be a nightmare for you. Do you need to mark the faces of these boards like I have? Not always. After a while, when you get good at construction, you'll know when that stud, when you're nailing this thing together, you'll know when that stud is pretty much perpendicular or straight up and down. This is just to help beginners and students figure out that I should line that stud up with my pencil marks. Just makes it a little easier for the students while they're working. So is it necessary? Not at all. As long as I've got marks that tell me where my stud should go, I should be just fine. It's just another step that can help beginners, especially students, become better at their craft a little bit. So that's pretty much it for wall layout without any rough openings. Our next video that we'll do on wall layout, we're going to take this a step further. We're going to not lay out any studs. We're going to show you how to lay out for a rough opening and then how you would account for all that stuff and put studs in it later. So until that time, everybody stay safe. I think this is Friday's video. You know, I'm recording these things almost like they record episodes of Wheel of Fortune. You know, I'm recording them days ahead of time, trying to remember when is this one going to air. But I think this is Friday's video. So everybody have a good weekend. Be safe and don't drive your parents crazy. And I'm looking forward to the ice opening up so we can get some crappie fishing done here. Take care, guys.